Good morning. Continuing our journey in the Hemshech Samach Vav. So we are learning the Frierdiker Rebbe's maamar. We're actually close to the end of the maamar Mah Yofis Tafris Tzadik Aleph from the year 1931, which followed a previous maamar Yechayenu Yamayim from that year, all based on explaining Samach Vav, pages that basically pages 14 and on. And now we are up to in Tzadik Aleph.
Mah Yofis.
Mah Yofis. What did I say? Mah Yofis? Mah Yofis. Okay. And we are now on page 256. 256, which corresponds to page 24, the beginning of the maamar Shuvi Yisrael, which was the last maamar we learned in Samach Vav, page 24 in the new edition. Just want to make sure. Yeah, good. So what did we learn yesterday? So we're learning about the bittul required, that suspension, that divestiture, that is required when you climb from one level to a level that's not commensurate to the lower levels. You have to somewhat strip yourself and free yourself from the garments, divest yourself from those garments of your perception or understanding or pleasure, all the different ways we discussed it, in order to elevate and appreciate and not be confused and distracted, be mavulbul, like he said, disturbed or distracted or confused by the lower level. And how that plays out in Gan Eden is the Nahar Dinur, the fiery river. And now we've learned that it's not just on one level. There's the fiery river between the lower Gan Eden and the higher Gan Eden. There's also Nahar Dinur from Elam Hazeh after the neshama goes through Gehenna, whatever way it goes through Gehenna. Obviously, tzaddikim don't go through Gehenna. That I discussed in Samach Vav when we learned it. To go into Gan Eden Atachten, because the neshama was influenced, and in some way he said nidbak, got attached to it, like it stuck to the neshama. It would be like even a tzaddik, if he hung around people who were all day materialistic. Not that he would become materialistic, God forbid, but it would have some influence on him. Influence not as in a negative way, but he's immersed. It's like when if you go bathing in a dirty lake, you're going to get dirty a bit, even if you're a pure person. So it's nidbak in the neshama things from this world. Chesed the high alma, as he put it. It's a lashon from the Gemara. Chesed the high alma, and as such, it needs to be cleansed of that in order to go into Gan Eden Atachten even. Just want to see something. 1 second. It's actually a lashon from Zohar. Okay. And then there's a higher level of Nahar Dinur between Gan Eden Atachten and Gan Eden that he said is like, relatively speaking, also like the difference between Geshem and Ruchni. And then there's the pillar, the Amud, which the Frierdiker Rebbe just touches upon a few lines. The Frierdiker Rebbe Rashab elaborates more. The pillar is another level in this interface between a lower level and a higher, that its main focus is not the cleansing, but the preparation of the neshama to be absorbed into the higher level. And then we began the next paragraph on page 256, which corresponds to Samach Vav, page Chavdal 24, that all this is Giluyim of Gan Eden. This is all the world of Giluyim, where there are all these elevations. But then there's Eden itself, not Gan, the Eden itself, which is not just Ha'ara. Atzmus Atayna Gaposhet. Gan Eden is coming through the river that flows from Eden into the Gan. And mafsik beineim, and separates, divides between them. And being only a reflection or revelation and a Gilead expression, there are many levels in Gan Eden, as we've learned. But Eden Atzmai Ayin Leidosa. But Eden itself is something that's imperceptible today and will only be revealed in the future. And that's where we stopped yesterday, and that's where I segued into Basilagani, the Maila Adin Ketz, the Eitzes, the treasures that are imperceptible, that are completely concealed. Sasum Be'etzem, as discussed in Basilagani, especially in chapter 16. Last night I gave a class, more detailed, a little more universal, a little more language that really relates to everybody. And we actually honored our dear friend Yitzchak, his birthday yesterday, Yud Shvat. So let's continue from there. That's where we're up to. We're in the second paragraph on page 256 in the maamar Mah Yofis. The pages can be found if you want to follow along on our WhatsApp Samach Vav group. And here, let us continue. I'll start from the third line of the second paragraph. Like the pasuk says, Eden itself, the etzem tainug aposhet, that is not subject to expression and revelation and so on, no eye has seen. Shebariba aliyas anal the neshamas beGan Eden, in all those elevations that we've spoken about in the souls in Gan Eden, and earlier we said even the highest souls like Moshe and the Ovis and Adam. In all those elevations, nevertheless, even after all the highest elevations, even Gan Eden Elyon, Ein Leidosa, the Eden itself is not, no eye has seen. Being that this will be revealed in the future dafka. The La'asid Ksiv. I'm looking at the Adei Rebbe Rashab. Yeah, word for word from the second paragraph on page 24 in Samach Vav. La'asid it says, that your teacher, your master, Merecha, your teacher will no longer be concealed. Lo yikonif, as in a konif, like the Alter Rebbe translates, a lavush, a garment. No, he will be unveiled. And your eyes will see your master without any veils. Meaning without any of the hefsekim that we've spoken about, any of the partitions and so on. She's gal ozpinis atzmus atainug, because then the core delight or pleasure, or someone gave me on Shabbos, someone said to me, maybe enjoyment may be a word. Again, all these words are all inadequate, but maybe all put together, they give us some picture. The delights of the king within himself, not due to something, not as a result of someone else entertaining him or someone else stimulating, but just all within the etzem itself, meaning beyond expression, but that will be revealed and be expressed to us as love it. K'moishu be'etzem hareimamus the Ein Sof Baruch Hu. The way it is, the etzem hareimamus in the very core exaltedness or majesty, or what I say earlier before was afla, wonder of Ein Sof Baruch Hu. And I'm continuing to compare to Samach Vav, word for word. Here he adds the word Baruch Hu.
Where is it on the Samach Vav page? I'm also trying to track it line for line.
24.
Oh, page 24?
Yeah.
Ah, thank you.
Umasha neshamas achshav hoilchim ve'elam l'sham ve'lo yasiguhu. And this level is what the neshamas today, as they climb helchim, as they travel and they elevate to their ve'lo yasiguhu, they cannot arrive at this level. They will not. They will not reach this level. V'hainu. It's interesting. He says umasha neshamas in Samach Vav. He just says ma. V'hainu, and that means the ribe aliyah shalahem, that the many elevations and ascents of the souls, it's only from a reflection, it's only from a revelation, like we spent, a reflection of the etzem. It's not the etzem itself, of the core tainug, of the core pleasure canal. The ha'ara he gam ken b'bchinas Ein Sof. So even though it's a reflection, it's also a level of Ein Sof, because it's a reflection like even sunlight. It's a reflection of the sun. So it has sunlight in it. So the same thing, Ein Sof is Ein Sof, but it's still ha'ara of Ein Sof. It's the level of Ein Sof. And that's why indeed it has a multitude of levels. The Ribe Aliyas Aden Shir Canal, and a multitude of elevations without any limit, without any measure, as we discussed earlier. So we talk about the Giluyim of Seder Shtalshlus, not Gan Eden. There we said it's like rungs of a ladder, or the way he gave the example, chains, links in a chain, and they're all commensurate to each other. That's a finite structure. But here we're talking about is a reflection and a revelation, expression of the infinite, but only an expression. So on one hand, it's infinite, but it's not the etzem itself. Because it's the level of Ein Sof, and that is also indeed the reason, that's why you need the bittul. Remember, the levels of Seder Shtalshlus, you don't need that level of bittul like Nahar Dinur, because it's not a paradigm shift. When you're going, let's say, from one level to the next that are close to each other, relative to each other, like let's say from Bina to Chachma, for example, or from Midas to Mechin, you don't necessarily need this type of bit. You need always bittul when you climb, but not this level of divesting and erasing, so to speak, and forgetting a lower level. But here, because you're dealing with a ha'ara of Ein Sof, that's infinite levels, that's why, indeed, you need the bittul, which is an interesting additional point. Between one level and another, you need to have the bittul of the lower level, the previous level, because there's an infinite, or there's a gap between them. They're not commensurate, they're not proportionate to each other. And nevertheless, nevertheless, after all this, though we're talking here not about finite levels, we're talking about even infinite levels, but it's still only a ha'ara. So achar kol zeh, it's still not b'chol ha'aliyas, with all the elevations, lo yagiu l'b'chinas reimus ha'atzmus the Ein Sof b'b'chinas ha'tainug ha'atzmi. The souls will not reach today the level of the reimus ha'atzmus, the exaltedness, the majesty of Atzmus, meaning the beyond that which is the imperceptible dimensions of Atzmus, of Ein Sof. I should the Ein Sof, and that level of that core pleasure or core delight. And on the contrary, again, all this straight from Samach Vav. I've not seen there's one or two additional words that just help the vocabulary, the understanding of it, but more or less it's the same idea. On the contrary, Kol masha elin l'mayla yeser, the higher you climb, the higher you reach, hine eid yeser nifla mehen, even more wondrous and more awe-inspiring is the Atzmus Ein Sof. Uboim yeser lebitl hasaga, and they come to even a deeper level of bitl of their consciousness or their comprehension. Lefisha ein shir l'reimus de Ein Sof be'ilu hatainug, because there's no limit to the remus of Ein Sof in the ilu of the tainuk. So it's not like they'll finally reach it at some point. The higher you go, the more you realize how infinite it is. And as such, it's like climbing a mountain. The more you see the broader horizon, the more you realize and appreciate how much there is, how the broader, even the bigger horizons are even bigger than you are. It's not like you get closer you feel even more distant in a way. Not in a bad way. It's just you're getting a bigger picture of what of Atzmus is really like. Okay. Let me stop here for any questions before I continue. And it's interesting how the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to weave the next section a bit different, not different in Havana, but because this maamar takes a little different course here, but he's going to go into the next topic of Samach Vav, but I'll get to that in a minute. But let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything.
Hi, Rabbi. First of all, thank you for the very kind words in the class yesterday, master class. You've the question here. You've hinted at this. Maybe you've even said it. But is just again one quick spillover from Basi Lagani. Would you say that Aden is like the Ein Sof Adei Ad, because it's a place, it's an actual tangible physical place. It's not Atzmus, but yet it's not reachable per se. So it seems like it's pretty correlated with the same concept. I know you've hinted at it, but I'm not sure you actually said it, Dafka, that way.
Because I don't want to define anything that the Rebbeim don't define. If they would actually say it, it's one thing. I did correlate. That was my whole talk yesterday about that.
I know. Yeah.
That was a segue, but I'm not going to know. This is not a map where you can actually say this is this. It has, there's something in common.
Similar qualities, yeah.
I believe in Basi Ligani, he mentions Ayin Le Rasa. I don't remember, and I didn't look it up. I think he mentions Ayin Le Rasa, so that would make it stronger. That is the level of Helam Ha'atzmi or the Sosum Be'etzem or Maila Maila Adei Ad. You can look it up. If it says in Basi Ligani Ayin Le Rasa, so it strengthens the correlation.
Which is Adam?
I did say, in general terms, I was saying the Gan Eden levels, Ha'ara, are more Lamata Mata than Tachlis, because more Gilui Acha Gilui, and Lamayla Mata and Ketz is more the Ayin Le Rasa. That's what I compared. I did compare it to that. But to say definitively this is this level, not necessarily. It could be a lot of ways that you can explain it, but overall, it's definitely
very similar concepts. Yeah.
And again, I do think he said Ayin Le Rasa in the earlier chapters, like chapter 11 or chapter 12.
I'll look into it.
Gani, he may even mention Ayin Le Rasa, or even later. I'm almost sure I remember mentioning it.
I'll look. Thank you very much. By the way, you're. No, I just want to encourage everybody. I wanted to encourage everybody. The class, the master class last night was phenomenal. If you had a hard time understanding this year's parak, chapter 16, it's because particularly the cornerstone of it, which is a paradox, very difficult to understand. I've listened to half a dozen lectures. I mean, separate lectures, probably 2 dozen.
Would you put it on the line?
I did.
It's online. The class is online. Broadcast every Wednesday. It goes out to everybody.
Rabbi, it was really brilliant. I mean, it's such a hard concept to understand, and you made it so digestible. It was unbelievable.
I appreciate it. Thank you. You can post it. It's first of all, it's sent out to all the WhatsApp people yesterday, the class. Secondly, it's on YouTube. Yeah. If you're subscribed to our YouTube channel, you'll get a notice. Very easy. Maybe show Shlomo once and for all how you get notices and so on. It seems like he keeps asking how you find. These classes go to thousands of people.
YouTube? The Wednesday night
you class? Don't go to YouTube. You should be getting, if you're subscribed, you'll get it in your note. It'll get a notice that it's, maybe Yitzchak can show you.
Rabbi Teichel, I just sent it to you. Rabbi Teichel.
That's why we have grandchildren.
Thank you, Yitzchak. Thank you.
That's why we have grandchildren.
Okay.
I have a story about that after the recording, Rabbi, for you especially.
But overall, the Ayin Le Rasa is Adam. I know, I heard what you said. You don't want to say that, but in general.
I said what I had to say.
This is how I understood.
Okay.
But this is not Atzmus.
Okay, any other questions? I don't know what you
I
mean by
asked-
Atzmus. Every time you mention that, I still don't know what you mean by Atzmus. He calls it Atzmus here in the maamar.
But the Vitor said before that maybe it's compared to oil Ein Sof.
Well, L'mayla Adei Ad is not Atzmus. It's Ein Sof L'mayla Adei Ad. We're talking about L'mayla Adei Ad. If you're comparing Eden to L'mayla Adei Ad, L'mayla Adei Ad is not is Ein Sof. That's the whole point of the maamar. Anyway, but Oyer is Me'ein HaMoyer, and therefore Kadam Kikad Musay, and it has in its elements and reflecting Atzmus. So it's we talked about that many times. That question is what you're asking. If you want to ask me a specific question on this, I'm happy to answer. Atzmus is the one that gives us the Eitzes. He's not the Eitzed himself. The Eitzed is, the Melech is giving us treasures. But later in Basel Legani, if you listen to my class I gave in a Holoteda a few weeks ago, later in Basel Legani, he goes even higher that the Eitzes, the treasures, are not just Atzmus Ein Sof, as in Lamai Adei Ad, it's Atzmus Ein Sof itself, just for the record. But that's all part of the level by level that he discusses. Okay, one of the reasons I don't want to call Eden L'mayla Adei Ad is because he says here that there's no aliyas in Eden because it's an etzem, and etzem there's no aliyas lost at love. Remember, aliyas are only in If Eden is L'mayla Adei Ad, that's and L'mayla Adei Ad there are levels L'mayla Helam Acha Helam. So, and other reasons. So, look, trust me, I'm a little experienced with these topics. I have to be very careful when you compare different maamarim. You can compare them in general terms to get the general idea, but to definitively state, like the Rebbe wrote actually to me 40 years ago in Tov Vav, I asked questions on this topic, and the Rebbe wrote that he did not come to establish mishmeidus, which means to establish definitive boundaries and definitive parameters to these concepts, because they're all sublime levels, they all overlap, they're all not defined like I always say, it's not one is salt and one is sugar and one is pepper. It doesn't work that way. There, everything overlaps, so that's why I'm being very careful. Like I said, if you're talking about Ein Sof, L'mayla Adei Ad, is that Eden? Eden here, he's saying it doesn't have aliyas. It's Atzmus itself. Like he said earlier, and Etzem doesn't have aliyas. He said earlier in Samach Vav. On the other hand, he did say here that as the neshamas climb and they go higher, they realize how much more there is, and it's even more hafla. So that can be discussed as well, but I don't want to go into that right now. The point is that, that's the point. That's all I want to say right now. Let us now continue. Are there any other questions?
I found a maamar where the Rebbe maamar says, and I just posted it in the chat here, where the Rebbe says, I don't think it's Basel Gani, but it's Tafshin Mem Vav. It's a maamar from ER. Anyways, he says, God be Yemos Mashiach v'afal pichen amru she be Yemos Mashiach. It says amru she be Yemos Mashiach lo yeh gilui bechinas ein lo rasa, and he has in parentheses bechinas Eden.
That's the whole Samach Vav. You don't need the Rebbe's maamar. That's what Samach Vav says. Eden is Ein Rasa. That we know. That's a given.
Oh, okay. Remember, I got home at 2:15 a.m.
Let me just tell you something. With all the qualities of ChatGPT, you have to be very careful in this regard, because you're going to find very select maamarim that maybe don't even have a connection. The idea of Eden and Ein Rasa is explicitly Samach Vav.
Yeah.
We're talking about L'mayla Adei Ad.
Yes.
So that I believe in Basel Legani. Look in Basel Legani to see if it says Ein Rasa.
Okay.
Even if it does, it still doesn't mean it's the exact level. Ein Rasa simply means like the Eitzes. Eitzes are completely concealed. No eye has ever seen them. That's fine. You can say that on the treasures, and then you say it on Eden, and it has some similarities. That's what I've been saying.
Yeah.
We don't have to make them exactly the same level. Okay. Continuing on here. So now, let me just preface the next section. In Samach Vav, the bottom of page 24, he begins now, Ubir Inyan, and we learned this already. And the explanation of this Inyan is he's going to explain the interpretation of the tefillah, Meshubach umafur Adei Ad Shemo HaGadol, which we say in Baruch Shamar every morning. The Frierdiker Rebbe just flows literally in the same sentence. So the Rebbe Rashab is going to elaborate a lot more on this Meshubach umafur Adei Ad Shemo HaGadol. The Frierdiker Rebbe is going to cite some of it, but not quite all of it. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, the flow, and here we're continuing to learn. So after he's saying, Ein Sof be'ili hatainug kemaimer, like the statement which we say in Baruch Hashamar, Meshubach umafur Adei Ad Shemo HaGadol. So again, the Rebbe Rashab makes this a bira inyan. He starts a new subject. It's obviously also flowing and explaining the previous topic. So there's no change here in Havana and understanding. It's just the structure is a bit different. But the Frierdiker Rebbe just flows, and it's going to be a lot shorter. As I pointed out yesterday, there are things that the Frierdiker Rebbe elaborates upon and adds explanation, and there are things that the Frierdiker Rebbe actually doesn't even cite all of the Samach Vav. You put them both together, and you have the whole picture. So now we're going to start learning this, and it's going to be very familiar territory because we learned this, as I said, it's paralleling page 24, bottom of page 24 in Samach Vav. So what does it mean? Meshubach umafur Adei Ad Shemo HaGadol. Literally it means that Meshubach praised, umafur, and elevated or exalted, Adei Ad, forever and ever, is the Shemo HaGadol, is the great name. Your great name is Meshubach umafur Adei Ad. So he says, Sheyesh b'zeh shnei pirushim. Word for word from Samach Vav here. I'll point out when he adds something or changes something significant. There are two meanings. What does this mean, Adei Ad? Again, if you remember from Samach Vav, you'll recall, but we're going to review it again now. So refresh your memory. What's the first interpretation? Adei Ad, as we all, the third, Noshe Nitzchis, forever and ever. You say Adei Ad, La'olam Va'ad, like we say. Loshen Nitzchis. The second interpretation is the opposite. Ad means ad kan, until here. It's like a stop, a pause. V'habeiz loshen hefsek. Loshen that there's a pause, there's an interruption. Like we say, kamoy ad kan tchum Shabbos. The Gemara says ad kan, till here is the boundary of Shabbos. On Shabbos we have, it says in the Pasuk, you're only supposed to, besides the Isra of carrying, you're also not allowed to just walk out of a city just forever. There's a certain point that's called Tchum Shabbos, the boundary. So where's the boundary? 2,000 cubits generally. And the expression is Ad Kan Ad. Ad Kan means up till here. That's a pause, an interruption. So when you say Adei Ad, it has both meanings. And then he's going to explain what that means, of course. The first one is easy to understand, but what is the second one we'll soon get to. This goes into the whole ad va'ad, al ad v'lo ad, if you recall. But we're going to learn all that now. U'kamoisha kasav, another, like it says in the pasuk, this the Frierdiker Rebbe is adding. Frierdiker Rebbe adds the pasuk, it doesn't say it in Samach Vav. Ad pa tove, v'lo seisif. Till here you come, you arrive, and don't add any more. So it's also ad pa. Same idea, ad kan. Pa and kan are basically synonymous. So here ad is being used as actually referring to a pause, a stop. Adei Ad is Noshe Nitzchi, forever and ever. And here it's a pause, a stop. V'shnei emes. And both are true. Now why? How do you explain that? Especially they seem contradictory actually. You know, Mafur, Meshubach, Mafur, Adei Ad Shemo HaGadol sounds like your great name is forever exalted or forever praised. Adei Ad, the meaning hefsek means that there's a hefsek in the praise. What does that mean exactly? So we're going to understand that shortly. So he continues. Both are true. And first he's going to start with the first interpretation. Now the question is, what is Shemo? Say Shemo HaGadol. What's Shemo HaGadol? He says the Shemo HaGadol Yadua, and here you'll see the connection to the whole topic here. It's known Shehu B'chinas Ein Sof Habli Gvul. Be'eze Madrega Shehu. Means Shemo HaGadol, when it says in Chazal, like Atshel Nivra Elam Hayu Shmei Levad. Okay, there it doesn't say Shemo HaGadol. Wherever it says his great name, what does that mean? So if you're not familiar with the esoteric interpretations, it sounds like a poetic expression. His great name, his exalted name. Like in English, you see the great name of God. And it's actually quite inadequate because it does start sounding very redundant and almost very, very, very juvenile in a way. But when you look Chassidus, Pnimis HaTeira, Kabbalah Chassidus, Shemo HaGadol is a level. It refers to Ein Sof, whatever level it may be. Not talking about any specific level in Ein Sof. So you say the great name, you're not talking about the Eibishter himself, because that's not Shemo. Shemo is his name. And you're talking about great name. On the other hand, you're not talking about a creation like a tree. It's God's name. So Shem and Oir, you may have, I don't know if you remember this, but in Samach Vav in Ayin Beis, he spoke about it. He said, in some places, he says that what Kabbalah calls Oir, or Zohar and Kabbalah call Oir, Chazal call Shem. It actually says that in some maamar. So Shem and Oir, even though there are two different levels when you break it down, but we're not getting into that right now. Overall, Shem is essentially a reflection or an expression. We say God's name, it's an expression. That's why we say God has different names according to his different actions. Havaya, Elikim, Svokes, Shaddai, Kael, and so on. Because the names are expressions of divine energy. Elikim, for example, is the divine as it manifests in Din and Gvura. Havaya, Hashem, is usually in compassion. Kael is Chesed. Svokes is the God in the state of like war, like in the case of Basaligani, warrior. Bottom line is that Shema is saying Shemo HaGadol in general is Ein Sof, whatever level it is. And we know when we talk about the Shem of the Eibishter, we've talked about Shem Havaya in Atzilus, there's Havaya in the Chachma, Havaya in Bina, there's Havaya, or all the Shemas. There's different Shemas in the whole Shtalshlus. So whatever level, that's basically Ein Sof. Habli Gvul, Be'eze Madrega Shehu. Whatever level it is, when you say the Shemo HaGadol, you're talking about the level of Ein Sof Habli Gvul. Im Shazel B'Bchinas Ein Sof Shalamayla Miseder Ishtalshlus. And now he tells us in general terms. Actually, I want to correct what I said. He's not referring to the Shemus in the Atzilus in the Sfiris, because that is not Bli Gvul necessarily. He's saying like, whether you're talking about Shemo HaGadol and Ein Sof that's higher than Seder Ishtalshlus, so we're not talking about in Seder Ishtalshlus. So you have Ein Sof, you're talking about it higher than Ishtalshlus, but it's still after the Tzimtzum. Or B'sharshe in its root of Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. In both cases, the word Shemo HaGadol is applicable because that Shemo HaGadol is a general term for Ein Sof. Whatever level, whether it's the Ein Sof after the higher than Ishtalshlus or Ein Sof higher than before the Tzimtzum. V'hainu b'chinas Atzmus Ein Sof. So by Ein Sof after the Tzimtzum, we don't call it Atzmus Ein Sof. Here we call it the core of Ein Sof, Habilti Bal Gvul, infinite, unlimited. Now we understand why he says Adei Ad. The b'chinu madrega zu hapirush Adei Ad hu lashon nitzchis. When we're talking about Shemo HaGadol as Ein Sof, and we just established Ein Sof, Bli Gvul, so then, in this level, what would be the meaning when you say Meshubach and Adei Ad Shemo HaGadol? It's like saying that Ein Sof is Adei Ad, is forever and ever. It's Bli Gvul. Lashon Nitzchis, eternal. V'hainu, and he spells it out. V'hainu, the b'chinas hahilul v'ashvach, the praise and the glorification. You can say the glorification and the praise of God in this prayer, in this tefillah, when we say Meshubach and Mafur, the Remus Ein Sof, Ein Leishir Klal. She's essentially saying that Meshubach and Mafur, this praise and this glorification of Ein Sof, does not have any limit. And that's why we use the word Adei Ad. Ki yeshvach v'tchila, because there is a praise and a glorification, sheyesh le'kates v'gvul, that does have a beginning and an end, that has parameters, finite parameters. But who? All this is word for word from Samach Vav. Just continue to telling you that. But who? Kasher, next page, 257. Kasher ha-meshubach. When you're praising someone, the one that's being praised, who b'bchinas gvul, b'chachmase v'gdulase, if he's a finite entity, let's say you're praising a person, you're complimenting him, you're singing his praises, but being that he's a finite entity, and his wisdom, in his wisdom and in his stature, he is a finite person, or other qualities that he may have. They're all finite. And therefore, once you finish expressing the praises that of this finite entity, yufsik shelo yuchel l'shavchei eid. So yufsik, you pause, you stop. You can't keep praising him because he's finite and therefore his qualities are finite. So once you finish, you finish, like you see when they introduce, let's say, a speaker, or they introduce someone they're honoring. So yes, they lay it on heavy for different reasons, but at some point you stop because obviously a finite entity has finite praises. That is with the gvul. Because you can't praise him more than the measure that he contains. But by contrast, but when you're exalting and praising and glorifying, Ein Sof, that has no kates, has no edge, has no end and no beginning, v'shir, and measure at all. Therefore, the praises and the glorifications and the praises also are beblikvul, are endless and without limit. Okay. All this, word for word from Samach Vav, we're now on page 25 in Samach Vav, just for parallel purposes. And now he takes us back to Gan Eden, because that's the level of Gan Eden, this Ein Sof. The Zeu Inyan Aliyah is the Gan Eden, Shem Beribu Me'ed Bli Gvul Canal, and that indeed is the Aliyahs, the elevations we've been discussing earlier in Gan Eden, because it's Lefishu B'chinas Ein Sof. Because Gan Eden is Taka Gan Eden, coming from the river. So it's only ha'ara, a reflection, but it's a reflection of Ein Sof. So as an Ein Sof, there's infinite elevations. So that's interpretation number one in Adei Ad. Nitzchis, eternal, forever. Now we're going to go to the second interpretation, but let me stop in case anybody wants to ask anything. The only thing I've seen that the Frierdiker Rebbe added, besides a few words here and there, Eshis HaKesher, Eshis Kishur, is the Pasuk. He added another proof about Ad Pa. But beyond that, it's pretty much word for word. Are there any questions? So now he says like this. Omnom, however, Mizeh Hatam Atzmei, yeah, citing the Rebbe Rashab here. For this very reason that we just described, that it's endless, Yesh B'zeh Pirush HaBeis. Adei Ad also has, therefore, the second interpretation. Ad loshen hefsek. Ad from the word ad pa, until here, and not further. How? How do you explain that? The inyan hefseku, what is the pause? So before, when we were talking about a finite entity, the hefsek is very straightforward. A finite entity has an end, period. Now we're talking about something that has no end. So what's the hefsek here? How do you say Shemo HaGadol, Ein Sof? How do you say hefsek? Hefsek shebechol ha'ilulim atishbachis. That with all the glorifications and the praises, lo yagia klal lebechinas ha'atzmus. You'll never reach the level of Atzmus. So here, pause now takes on a different meaning. Not pause, an interruption as in a finite entity. Pause, the exact opposite. It's so infinite that you're never going to reach it. And that's why there's a hefsek, because you recognize that. Ki yesh beis inyanim. And now he explains it. Again, this is all from Samach Vav, no additions from the Frierdiker Rebbe that I see so far. There's two inyanim, and here he brings the two inyanim from the Lashon, where it talks about Ki yesh beis inyanim, v'heim ad va'ad b'chlal, va'ad v'lo yad b'chlal. So the Gemara, I think when we learned it the first time, I spoke about it in the context of space. I believe the Gemara talks about it in the context of time. That when you say that until a certain time, you can say a prayer or a certain thing, the question the Gemara asks, when you say until, do you mean until including that point, or until without including that point? Like if I said to you that until Plag Mincha, whatever, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you could daven Shachris, or you could begin davening Mincha, or whatever, something with a limit. Does it include 2 o'clock, or does it mean till 1:59? So that's two different interpretations in the word ad. One is ad v'lo yad b'chlal. One is ad v'ad b'chlal. Ad means ad till here and including the till. Va'ad v'lo yad b'chlal means until here but not including the till, meaning up till here but not more. You could also find this regarding boundaries between, let's say, neighbors. Where does one property end? Where does the next one begin? So these have implications. But here he's talking about, obviously, in spiritual context. So you have ad v'ad b'chlal, ad v'lo yad b'chlal. Ad v'ad b'chlal hu shemadrega ha'alef. What does it mean on a more, like in this case, spiritual level? It means from the first level, bo magil madrega acheres. Ad va'ad means you're traveling, you come to the boundary, wherever that ad is, and it includes the place you've arrived at. That means one level is entering into the next level. There's no real boundary in the sense where you have to create a separation between the two. And ad v'lo yad b'chlal means that yes, you've arrived at a new level, but now you're going to need a bittul, as we learn and we will learn, to be able to enter the new level. You cannot use the same resources you had in the earlier level. So ad va'ad is basically means commensurate levels, one to the next. One rung of a ladder leads you to the next rung. Ad va'ad. One link in a chain leads you to the next link. But when there's a leap, meaning a level that is a bligvul level, there, it's ad v'lo yad b'chlal. V'zeu in a hefsek. And that's what hefsek here means. Not hefsek as in a limit, where it stops because it's a finite entity. The hainu shagami megil le'ili ha'yesel gadol, meaning no matter what level you reach, even if you reach the highest level, adayin hu b'chinas ad v'lo yad b'chlal. Like he said earlier, you still haven't reached the destination because it's so infinitely beyond you, and you appreciate it even more as the higher you climb. Means you'll never reach to the true Eir of Elikus of Atzmus. Rak la'osid, only in the future, and this is the Chiddush of Ayin Le'rosa, L'tchias HaMesim, when souls and bodies will return and unite with each other. Then you'll have the level of Atzmus will be revealed and it'll be in a form of asaga, of comprehension. Is that a paradox? Yes, it is. But remember, this comes after long and arduous and difficult Avodah, where the entity below, meaning us, our Avodah, has refined us to be able to contain these higher levels. That's why it's only going to be L'Asad Lave. And we discussed this as well at length. And I see here, Samach Vav, here now, this is where I think the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe and Samach Vav, they don't digress, but the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to take this now. We're literally one more page of this maamar. So he's going to now conclude this inyan. Samach Vav just begins to discuss it at length. So the topic is really, we need Samach Vav now because that's where it really is explained at length. Whereas the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to bring it back now to Ayin Le'Rasa and the finite and the infinite levels above. But he did bring Ad V'Lo Ad, Ad and Ad V'Ad B'chlal, and Ad V'Lo Ad B'chlal. So I'm going to stop here, the end of the paragraph on page 257, and then he's going to go on to V'Zeu Ayin Le'Rasa. The Rebbe Rashab is going to continue to explain these levels. So we're going to wind down now with the Frierdiker Rebbe in the next class or two when we finish this maamar, and then we'll return to Samach Vav. I just want to see something. And then he goes, L'chol tichla d'isi kates. Yeah, Samach Vav is a lot more here that we have not, that Frierdiker Rebbe is not going to cover. So be it. So the parallel to Samach Vav, now 257 is page 25 in Samach Vav. And I have to see if afterwards he's going to bring from free. Okay, we'll see. I'll look it up. Any questions?
It seems like in this end portion of the Frierdiker Rebbe's maamar, he's actually shorter than the Samach Vav.
Much shorter.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It leaves the whole sentence more or less open.
Because this maamar is self-contained. The Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe, didn't come to elaborate on Samach Vav. He said a maamar, and he's using his father's maamar, citing it and explaining it for the context that he wanted to explain. So there are plenty of obviously overlapping, and even word for word, there are entire sections that are straight from Samach Vav. But it's not, this is not a beard on Samach. I just chose to teach it because I know that he's explaining Samach Vav, but it's a maamar of the Frierdiker Rebbe. If you didn't know the Samach Vav, this maamar would be completely understood without it. There's nothing missing here in the context of this maamar. We do know the Samach Vav, so we understand the theme is a much broader theme. But this is very common, very common. Very often, a Rebbe will quote a piece of a maamar from another Rebbe, and then he'll continue on whatever he wants to discuss. Look, we saw with HaMagbiel L'Sheves. Ayin Beis is 1,400 and some pages, and he quotes many different maamarim, and then at the end of HaMagbiel L'Sheves, what he needs, he quotes, and what he does not need for the understanding of the Ayin Beis, he doesn't quote. Sometimes it helps to look to get more elaboration. Sometimes you find that it went on a different track. This is very, very common in Chassidus, that a certain topic will go in different ways, in different maamar.
Yeah, but here he took it all the, like in the Adei Ad, he took it all.
Yeah, this is very common.
Yeah.
I'll show you hundreds of places like this. This is a very common thing. Frierdiker Rebbe, Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab does it with the Rebbe Marash. Rebbe Marash and Samach Tzedek can perform. It's very common in Chassidus that you can take an entire piece, even word for word, and then go wherever you go with it. He's not here coming to copy Samach Vav. He's using the Samach Vav to say a maamar.
Make his point, yeah.
Okay. So we'll stop here. Level page 257, corresponding to page 25 in Samach Vav. Are there Any other questions?
Maybe I'm out of topic, but you gave us wonderful perspective on the pause and how different pause may be. And then later about the shame of Hashem, shame, and also the levels. And at the end of this line of thinking, you said we have our limits to roimamos, to exalt God. And this is because we are human. And right away, I was thinking about Psukkah de Zimra that actually delegate our prayer for God to angels. And from this point of view, maybe angels has more capacity to praise, and we borrow for them this capacity. And then the pause means that at the end, neither we nor angels could reach the true level of prayer to God. And only after resurrection, we will have this capacity. And maybe, just my thought, maybe God actually have pleasure in our simple prayer than the level of angels. And the goal for him, when we will reach that capacity, to give them the praise in full.
I'm not fully understanding what you're saying, to be honest. I'm not sure why angels come in here. How angels come in here.
We were talking about Psukkah.
Bottom line is, what we've learned is very straightforward. The souls today elevate higher and higher. It's infinite levels, but still ayin le'rasa. There's still a level of Eden that they cannot perceive. La'asid in the future, through our avodah down below, we will be able to perceive that. So that's what basically was said here. I'm not sure the other aspects.
Simple application. For me, it's an application how we can treat our Psukkah de Zimra. And
okay, so that's your personal. Okay, fine, but okay, I have no comment on that. That's you could take anything we learn here and apply it personally, which is good to do by all means. This is a prayer from Psukkah de Zimra, Meshubach for Adei Ad Shemo HaGadol. Two interpretations. One is that the infinite, nitzkius, eternal aspect of Ein Sof, and the other is that as high as you go, you never reach ultimately the end. That's the kavanah we should have when we're davening it. And yes. We will reach.
Yes, it's.
But we still have to understand what that means to reach. If it's unreachable, how do we reach it? So that I've explained in other classes. We'll talk about that more later. Yeah.
Not right now, but in future.
What does it mean to reach something that's unreachable? So we'll talk about that. Let me stop here.